Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to today's INCEIF Research Sharing. My name is Nurfara Melissa, the executive from INCEIF Knowledge Management Center, KMC, and I'll be your MC for this afternoon. On behalf of KMC, I would like to welcome everyone to our 7th INCEIF Research Sharing Series. Just a little reminder before we begin. I hope that everyone can please mute your microphones so that there is no interruption during our speaker's presentation. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation. If you have questions to ask, please type them in the chat box and I will read out your questions to our speaker. Or you can unmute to ask your question directly to our speaker once we open for Q&A. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, as an introduction, the INCEIF Research Sharing Series is organized to promote and create awareness to the publications written by INCEIF community members to research and the academic world. For today's session, we have invited Dr. Ahmad Lutfi Abdul Razak from Universiti Brunei Darusalam to share about his paper, Environment, Social and Governance ESG Performance and CDS Spreads, the Role of Country Sustainability. This research article is written together with Professor Dr. Mansur Ibrahim, Deputy President Academic and Dean, INCEIF University, and Dr. Adam Ng, who is also our PhD alumni. The article is published in the Journal of Risk Finance, accessible through Emerald Insight platform, which is subscribed by INCEIF University. Before I invite the speaker, let me share with you our speaker's background. Currently, Dr. Ahmad Lutfi Abdul Razak is the Deputy Dean Research and Lecturer of Islamic Finance at the Universiti Brunei Darusalam, School of Business and Economics. He has co-authored several articles in international, peer-reviewed journals and book chapters, and he has presented his work at international academic conferences. He received the President Award in recognition of achieving the best academic performance in the graduating class of 2019 for the Doctor of Philosophy in Islamic Finance at INCEIF University. Dr. Lutfi regularly provides consultation and advice to public and private sector organizations. He is currently an academic member of National Macroeconomics Development Committee and a focus group member of the Wakaf Empowerment Project at the Ministry of Religious Affairs. He is a Sharia Advisory Board member at Bank Islam Brunei Darussalam Securities, BIBDS Sdn Bhd, and Standard Chartered Securities Brunei Sdn Bhd. Prior to his PhD at INCEIF, he worked as a lecturer at the Sultan Sharif Ali Islamic University Unisa Brunei Darussalam. He also worked with Center for Strategic and Policy Studies SBS Brunei Darussalam on a number of national projects, which includes land optimization, national productivity, financial literacy, and doing business. His areas of research interest include Islamic economics, Islamic finance, sustainable finance, monetary economics, applied econometrics, institutional economics, economy history, and also behavioral economics. Without further delay, I now invite our speaker, Dr. Ahmad Lutfi Abdul Razak, to share his experience, finding, and views from the article Environment, Social and Governance ESG Performance and CDS Spreads, the Role of Country Sustainability. Dr. Lutfi, whenever you are ready.
Thank you very much, Farah Melissa. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so as mentioned, the title of this paper was published in the Journal of Risk Finance, titled ESG Performance and CDS Spreads, Role of Country Sustainability. The paper has 5 sections: introduction, literature and hypothesis development, research design, empirical results and discussion, summary and conclusion. So this is just one paper from my PhD thesis, and Alhamdulillah, it finally managed to get published around sometime last year, 2023. Even though I graduated late 2019, I think the road to publication has not been an easy process, and we can talk about that later. I think these are some of the things that perhaps they don't teach you at during your PhD, but it is a certain art as well, how to publish. So we'll talk about that later, inshallah. So a lot of you have heard about ESG, environment, social governance. It's been a key issue since the global adoption of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Paris Agreement, in line with growing global challenges facing the world. So ESG has been increasingly adopted by many corporations all around the world, by corporations in capital markets and as well as the banking sector as well. In 2016, the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, they launched the ESG in Credit Ratings Initiative. And since then, a lot of these credit rating agencies, including S&P Global, Moody's, and Fitch, have all started publishing ESG indicators alongside their traditional credit ratings. However, even last year, the adoption of these ESG ratings remains to be inconsistent between providers. Generally, in the literature, the relationship between ESG performance and financial performance, there's relatively two different views, two conflicting views. The risk mitigation view is primarily related to the stakeholder theory of Richard Freeman, 1984. So there's this idea that the adoption of ESG generates goodwill or moral capital for the firm. So when a company adopts certain practices that improves their environmental performance or their social performance, this can lead to increased brand loyalty. And this increased brand loyalty will help to add value to the company, and therefore they are able to pay back their financial obligations. It can also help to improve reputations among governments as well as other stakeholders. The alternative view is called the overinvestment view, and this is related to shareholder theory, led by proponents such as Milton Friedman and others, where ESG basically constitutes an agency cost and a wasteful diversion of resources. So rather than investing in ESG, the idea is that you could actually improve the business in other ways, and therefore this expenditure into these other areas are costly, and therefore they reduce the firm value, and therefore that reduces the firm's ability to repay or creditworthiness. In terms of the existing empirical evidence, it's largely positive, but I'll go through very quickly about the literature. But basically, there are three main concerns. Number one, especially prior to the work of Khan in 2016, they did not earlier papers did not account for the different materiality of ESG issues across different industries, and there's a lack of indication on which aspects of ESG to focus on. So typically, ESG is often seen as a blanket indicator but it doesn't give any useful advice, practical advice to companies on which specific indicators to focus on. Although there are papers, of course, coming up on that. And there's also limited studies that examine if country-level institutions are effective or otherwise in supporting corporate sustainability initiatives. So this study examines the ESG credit risk relationship by focusing on the impacts of the former ESG on a market-based measure of credit risk. And the major contributions of this paper is to use an objective measure of ESG performance from MSCI ESG, which rates companies according to their exposure to industry significant risks and opportunities, as well as their ability to manage them relative to industry peers. To examine the relationship of ESG component pillars, so environment, social, and pillar scores to credit risk. And finally, to investigate the influence of the external context on the ESG credit risk relationship. So in terms of the literature review, underpinned by an increased availability of data, the empirical literature on ESG performance has grown substantially over recent years. And most studies seek to establish whether there is a business case for ESG. So whether ESG is related to corporate financial performance across various metrics. And within the ESG CFP literature, there is an emerging strand of studies that explores the relationship between ESG and various measures of risk. And we'll just go through some of them here that are related to credit risk. So most of the literature seems to find that there is a negative relationship. But there are some other papers also that find no effect between measures of credit risk and some even positive relationship. So what I know it might seem counterintuitive that I colored negative being green, but that is the hypothesis. You would expect that the firm that is performing well across ESG metrics would be less risky, and therefore we would have less credit risk. So that's consistent with the risk mitigation view. Now, you might have seen in the previous slide that there are different measures of credit risk being used. And in our paper, we do discuss the various challenges or issues related to these different measures. So with credit ratings, there might be an agency problem as it is paid by issuers. For corporate bond spreads, it might not just include credit risk, but also liquidity risk and systemic risk. And corporate bond spreads may also include some embedded options, which may be problematic. And the use of bank loan spreads uses an accounting-based measure, which requires additional information on the lender and borrower characteristics, which may not be readily available. And more recently, a lot more studies have started to use CDS spreads as a measure of creditworthiness. So CDS spreads refers to credit default swaps, which is a derivative. So CDS spreads are said to be a more reliable measure of credit risk as they capture the compensation that market participants are willing to pay for bearing that risk. And there are several studies on the ESG credit risk nexus that explores the effects of specific ESG issues, environment, social governance, as well as specific concerns such as climate change, carbon emissions, and so on. So following our literature review, we find that there is a research gap. Most studies focus on aggregate ESG scores, and they did not consider the materiality of sustainability issues across different industries. So this is saying is that what is material for a company in one industry may not be material for another company in a different industry. Secondly, most studies do not adequately explore which components of ESG performance are relatively more important. And thirdly, there's a lack of studies that use market-based measures of credit risk, such as CDS spreads, although there are some that are coming up. And this leads us to our first two hypotheses. Number one, better ESG performance is associated with smaller CDS spreads. And the second one is that better performance across ESG components, environment, social, and governance, is associated with smaller CDS spreads. And further, we also discussed that there are few studies within the ESG credit risk literature that explore the influence of the external context where the corporation is located, particularly the country sustainability. So according to the literature, country sustainability is defined as the extent towards to which the tenets, principles, and practices of environmental integrity and social equity are institutionalized and embedded in a specific country domain. And we, following this, we have our third and fourth hypotheses. The third one, the effect of ESG performance on CDS spreads is stronger in countries with higher levels of sustainability. And H4, the effect of ESG components performance on CDS spreads is stronger in countries with higher levels of sustainability. So very quickly about the data that we have, I'll just point out the main ones that we have. The credit risk data we have is using credit default swap spreads. The ESG measure comes from the MSCI ESG, which is a proprietary measure of ESG performance. And this is a very unique data set which does account for the materiality of ESG performance in different industries. And finally, our country sustainability index is taken from Bloomberg ESG's country risk tool. And we have our sample selection next. So the initial data set comprises of firms which have complete ESG data during 2013 and 2016. And what we do is we match the unique ISIN code with the ESG data and other financial information and company characteristics. And we exclude non-financial firms, those that do not take part in the CDS market, and those with incomplete data. And apart from the firm and country sustainability data, all of the continuous variables are Windsorized to mitigate the influence of outliers. And we come to a final sample of 1,872 from the observations for 573 companies or non-financial companies between the period 2013 to 2016. So this slide shows our empirical model that we have. So in our baseline model, we have here y is the CDS spreads, which is our dependent variable, and the independent variables include the measure of ESG, the firm specific variables, country year fixed effects, as well as industry fixed effects. And having a negative coefficient on beta 1 here would support our first hypothesis. And we can repeat the analysis using ESG components, environment, social, and governance to test for hypothesis number 2. And we can estimate models 1 and 2. So equation 2, we introduce the country sustainability measure, and we'll talk about that later, but we can estimate models 1 and 2 with pooled ordinary squares with robust center errors, which are clustered at firm level to account for serial correlation. So with this, with the introduction of this country sustainability variable, we can compute the marginal effects of ESG on CDS spreads at different levels of country sustainability, from minimum to maximum. And these coefficients can be graphed to display whether the country sustainability variable is significant or otherwise. If the shape of the graph is not constant, then this would support hypothesis 3 and 4 for the aggregate score and its pillar components respectively. Because if this coefficient, if the marginal effects is constant, then that means B2 is no longer, it is 0 basically, right? So that means that it's not dependent on the marginal effects, not dependent on country sustainability. So besides pooled OLS, we also explore the dynamic versions of equations 1 and 2 using two-step GMM estimator with macroeconomic control variables and country sustainability. The GMM procedure is widely used to address endogeneity with the lag-dependent variable, as well as the omitted variable bias. We also use Winn-Myers corrected standard errors to reduce normal bias from having small p large n panels. And following Goodman, we applied orthogonal deviation to build out coincident effects and good time dynamics as well. So this slide very quickly shows a portion of the table that we included in the journal article. So it shows which each column shows which model we're using and which hypothesis it's testing. So our first hypothesis is that there is a relationship between the aggregate measure of aggregate ESG measure and CDS spreads. H2 is on the pillar scores, and then H3 and H4 is where we introduce that interaction between the ESG score and the pillar scores, the environment, social, and governance pillars, with the country sustainability measure. And this table shows the results for system GMM. And basically, we find that for H1, we can see that there is a negative coefficient here. So there does seem to be a negative coefficient that's significant. So that supports our hypothesis that that better ESG performance leads to reduced credit risk. When it comes to the interaction term, however, we see that it's although it's non-significant, it is negative, which suggests that the risk mitigating impact of ESG performance is stronger in companies domiciled in countries with higher sustainability performance. So we can graph that as mentioned earlier, and what we see is that the beneficial effect of ESG in credit risk mitigation only appears as the country's sustainability variable surpasses the median score of roughly 40 and strengthens thereafter. So you can see here that that there is a negative relationship that is significant after the level of 40 onwards, and this is true with the OLS estimation as well as the system GMM estimation. So the results basically for the aggregate ESG and credit risk relationship They support hypothesis one that better aggregate ESG performance is associated with lower CDS spreads, and this is consistent with the majority of the literature. Hypothesis three is also supported. The effect of ESG performance on CDS spreads is stronger in countries with high levels of sustainability. So what we're saying is that country sustainability does moderate the ESG credit risk relationship, and it suggests that ESG performance and country level sustainability are complementary. When it comes to the components of ESG and credit risk relationship, this is where it gets a lot more interesting, because our results, and I'm not showing it here because then it will be quite busy, but you can refer to the paper itself. But the results suggest that among the ESG components, the governance pillar is relatively more important in credit risk mitigation compared to the environmental and social pillars, which show mixed results. So there is sufficient evidence overall to suggest that the governance pillar supports hypothesis two, and also sufficient evidence to support hypothesis four, that country sustainability moderates the relationship between components of ESG performance and credit risk, but that relationship shows mixed results. So there's mixed evidence as to whether country sustainability is a substitute or complementary to ESG performance across different components. But although the results are mixed, we show that the governance component does have a negative and significant effect on CDS spreads at almost all levels of country sustainability. And this is also consistent with the extant literature. And based on, so just to summarize, based on our sample during this time period of 573 firms, we have these main findings that overall, the aggregate measure of ESG is negatively associated with CDS spreads. The magnitude of ESG to credit risk relationship is stronger at high levels of country sustainability. And among the components of ESG performance, we find that the governance pillar is relatively more important in mitigating credit risk. And this holds even when considering country sustainability performance. There are three main implications from this study in improving ESG performance. So when companies reduce their carbon emissions, when companies improve their labor protection, then it may also have that effect of improving credit risk for the firms. However, corporations should, given the significance of the governance pillar, what we're saying is that it's not that the environmental pillar or the social pillar is insignificant or not important, but rather corporations should prioritize the strengthening of governance frameworks and procedures to reduce credit risk before the pursuit of other environmental or social objectives. The country level sustainability initiatives would not only help preserve natural capital and promote social capital, but also beneficial to the businesses and financial stability. Okay, so that is very quickly my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's okay. I would now pass on the floor to Farah Melissa for the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lutfi, for your insightful sharing. It was a detailed explanation given by you regarding your research topic for today. Now I open for Q&A session. We'll take questions from the chat box, if any. And you can also click the raise your hand emoji to directly ask your question to Dr. Lutfi. Any questions from the chat box? Okay. Yes. The questions from Juan Alfredo Alcorta. Do you have example of industries or products that can be considered ESG compliant but are not Sharia compliant?
Okay, thank you, Prime Minister. And I think that question is from Juan Alfredo Hotel. So thank you very much for that question. So this paper doesn't really delve into the Sharia compliant aspect of it. And in fact, ESG metrics, what I don't mention is, I didn't mention in my presentation, but in my thesis I did, basically, there is a lot of issues with ESG ratings, and although generally they are meant to promote good, there are some variations among different ESG ratings providers in terms of the what they consider to be more important, and therefore there's a lot of subjectivity as well when it comes to that. And although credit ratings are subject to um, uh, credit ratings are subject to regulation, ESG ratings and ESG ratings are not, and therefore it's still very much a bit of like Wild Wild West lah. And in fact, although I say that there's been a lot of interest in ESG, in more recent years, ESG has come under a lot of attack in recent years. So so there's a lot of people who have been politicizing the use of ESG. And I think in terms of the broader literature, I think I would say that it's important to consider other ESG metrics as well, and see whether the results would still hold there. That said, I think when it comes to Sharia compliant or otherwise, I think we shouldn't take it blindly that just because it's ESG compliant, it is also therefore Sharia compliant, because and I believe I've read some papers and some media reports as well that some of these ESG ratings are being politicized, and therefore it may not reflect true Islamic values.
Okay. For the second questions comes from Ms. Shahida Shahimi. Her question is, why no control variable is used, like macro or some specific variable that help to control the variance in the analysis?
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Ms. Shahida. I did actually include some those macro control variables, some specific control variables as well, industry specific controls in my paper, although in my results I didn't show that for brevity purposes. I didn't want to show a screen full of coefficients and everything. But if you refer to the paper, you'll find that we did include a lot of firm-specific or bank-specific, firm-specific control variables, as well as macroeconomic variables as well.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Lutfi. Can I ask a question?
Walaikum
Assalamu
salam.
alaikum. This is Mantai from UM, if you remember me. I was
Yes,
doing my
yes,
master when you
Alhamdulillah,
were,
brother. How
yeah,
are
how are you
you?
doing? Good, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, good to hear from you.
I just want your thought on the ESG, because ESG has become a trend, and I understand that your paper is on conventional, but I just want to ask in order to get your thought on the Islamic one. So ESG now also is applied on the Islamic firms, right? But to me, if the Islamic firms, if they are not already, compliant with the ESG, that means there's some issue on that one. So I would argue that Islamic firms, they don't need ESG, but if they don't, apply ESG, or they are not get adapted to that one, they will lose the market. For example, those who especially manufacturing firms or those who export. So what do you think of this one? Because everybody is generalizing the ESG, and also should be applied to Islamic and conventional bonds. So what is your thought on this one? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Mohammed Muntai. It's very good to hear from you. Brother Mohammed was a colleague of mine back when I was doing my PhD. And I believe he was doing his master's as well. We worked on some courses together. Alhamdulillah, good to hear from him.
Thank you. Thank you.
With regards to this, I think when you say Islamic firms and the use of ESG, when it comes to things like this, I believe that on the one hand, we shouldn't blindly follow, what others suggest to be, the right way forward. Because in Islam, we have our own principles, we have our own values, and I believe in that firstly. So, but secondly, I think the devil is in the details. So when we say that we should not follow ESG completely, because there's a wide variety of there's a lot wide variability in the use of ESG metrics, and so therefore we shouldn't adopt it blindly. But at the same time, we should look into the exact indicators or the specifics. The devil's in the details, basically. So a company can be Sharia compliant, an Islamic bank can be Sharia compliant, but it can still finance companies that are involved in deforestation, companies that are polluting the environment, that are, these things, they miss they're not included in existing Sharia screening techniques, right? So although in Sharia screening there might be some under some it may pass certain conditions, but when it comes to these other issues, it may not. So disclosure is very important. We need to know, we need to understand where Islamic banks are financing, where what companies are they financing, where are they investing in order for us to truly judge that. And although ESG is a useful way, is a useful start, I think we shouldn't follow it blindly, but rather look into the details. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Okay.
Okay. The questions come from Miss Siti Haja Abdul Halim. Salam Dr. Lutfi. Why is ESG more important now? But why not all companies embark on ESG? What are the benefits will company get if they implement ESG?
Okay, thank you, Farah Melissa. So I think that question, and in fact from my understanding of the literature as well, the papers have shown that there are certain costs when it comes to adopting ESG, and of course size matters as well. Perhaps companies which are larger may find it easier to adopt ESG practices compared to smaller firms. So it's not necessarily a given that the company which adopts ESG will have better financial performance. It is context dependent on its internal situation, but also in its the environment around them. As I've shown in our paper, we've looked at this variable country sustainability. So what that says is that the country, the environment, the institutional environment also matters as well. What are the laws or regulations that deal with labor protection, for example, environmental protection, and so on. So if regulations are weak, this might mean that some companies are able to get away with it, and others may not. So this has different effects in some countries and other countries. So we cannot have a one size fits all and just assume that adopting ESG will lead to some financial benefit as if that's the solution to all of the problems. Certainly, it is costly for smaller firms to adopt. And what I would say is that although, like you rightly mentioned, that ESG is increasingly being adopted, but at the same time, I believe in the last year or 2 years, ESG has come under a lot of attack as well. The label ESG has seen a lot of criticisms, and some companies have actually started to shy away from the use of ESG in their company reports. But I'd like to point out a paper by Alex Edmonds titled "Rational Sustainability." That was so it's a working paper, but he basically advocates for moving away from this label ESG, but this term rational sustainability suggests that what matters is long-term value, long-term sustainability, and the term rational referring to the strategies to get there. So it shouldn't be that the company is willing to sacrifice its financial performance or in exchange for some higher objective, but companies should adopt a longer view of that. And it's not just down to companies, of course. It depends on the underlying the underlying environment as well. So I mentioned that's why we looked at this moderating effect of country sustainability.
Ms. Shahida, do you have questions for Dr. Lutfi? You may unmute yourself.
Yeah, hello. I'm using Prof. Shahida link to join this meeting.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, can you hear me, please? So
yes.
me and the Prof. Shahida, we use the same link now. That's why I'm here under her name. So my question is regarding the sample. I've noticed that the sample is between 2013 and 2016, right?
Yes.
And the momentum of ESG started from 2015. So since after 2015 till 2022, after the pandemic until now, there is a huge momentum regarding ESG, and I'm currently working on ESG as well. So my question is, because I'm still in the analysis stage, do you think that the current paper, the results of the current paper would be different? Like there is a huge difference between the results of this paper and my future research or my current research, which is focusing on the last few years, not an old period. And I'm curious to compare the results in the future, but what do you think, please?
That's an excellent question. Thank you very much, brother, for sharing some news about your research. So it's important to highlight that the results that I've shown here today are true for within the context of my study, the availability of data that I had. Of course, if you have access to more recent data, I think That'll be very good, fantastic to see whether the results still hold, whether the results have external validity, as they say. Um, I'm not sure. I think that depends on what the evidence shows. Also, when it comes to ESG, I think there's been a lot of movement. There's been a lot of changes in how ESG metrics are constructed as well. So you need to be very wary about that. I think the sample that I looked at during that period, it was much less politicized. In more recent years, I think there's a lot more debate about it. So you might want to look at that. Um, and in any case, I think if you include time specific dummies, I think that should be sufficient. One thing I would like to highlight though, when it comes to publication, as you correctly pointed out, this paper is only looking at the time period from 2015 to 2016, and then I finished my PhD in 2019, and I only got it published in 2023. And this paper has gone through a lot of has gone through a bit of a long journey. I think from from the outside you only see the publication, but there's a lot of behind the curtain. Actually, there's a lot of submissions, rejections, comments from reviewers may also take time. So I think that's one thing that I wanted to say. I sort of hinted at it at the beginning of my presentation. So things like including a cover letter and responses to your reviewers are two things that are very important that I think are probably underestimated when it comes to publication. So I think having a well-written cover letter is very important, and having detailed responses to your reviewers' comments as well are very important when it comes to publication. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, next question is from Mr. Abdullah. Can I know the source of data that you use? Will Bank of FactSet or Bloomberg? And is there a difference of score in different agency, source, or platform?
So thank you, Brother Abdullah. So this data set, the MSCI ESG, was taken from a proprietary data set. It was sourced from MSCI directly. So I'm not sure if that's available on Bloomberg, because I believe that Bloomberg and they have their own ESG indicators. Even Thomson Reuters representative, they have their own ESG indicators. I think there are different ways of constructing the ESG variables, and if you look at the literature, there are some discussions about about these ESG ratings across different ESG providers. So sometimes a company may fare well, maybe performing well on one ESG ratings provider, but in another it may not be performing as well. So I think that's something that you may want to consider, and certainly in interpreting the results of our paper, then you should understand that it's only within that framework, rather than being necessarily true for everything. Right. So I think there's a lot of scope for future research as well if you're interested in this area. And do feel free to drop me an email if you want to discuss that further as well.
Okay, any other questions from others? Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you all for participating in this event. I think that's all the time we have for today's research sharing. Before we end our session, I would like to request all the participants to switch on your camera for a quick photo session. Okay, please switch on your camera. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, freestyle. One for freestyle. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Dr.
Madam
Lutfi.
Lisa. Thank you, Hanif. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Thank-
Lutfi.
Okay. Thank you again to Dr. Lutfi for the great sharing and presentation given. It was a pleasure to have you to share on the topic today. To all the participants, thank you for joining. We hope that you have learned from the author itself. Check out INCEIF MC Facebook page for other research sharing series, event, and trainings that we'll organize in the coming months. With that, thank you and see you again in the next INCEIF Research Sharing Series. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you. Thank you.